All right, guys, so let's look at the two topics that we didn't cover in class last week because the internet was down. So first one we're going to look at is reading our medication labels. So looking at this medication label for Zofran, you're going to notice that you have your trade name here. Trade name's here. Below that is our generic. Then we have the form, so that's how the medicine comes. We have our dosage strength of that medication. And then we have our amount, which is the total that we're going to get in this packaging. Other things that are on here is going to be your NOC number, manufacturer. Those usually I'm not super concerned with you guys knowing. And then you'll also see directions on the label as well that will be specific to that medication. So looking at these a little bit more, trade name. Remember in class we said that this is usually capitalized and written in bold print. Not always going to be, but it usually is. It's usually going to be the first name that you're going to find on your label, and it's always followed by a registered trademark symbol. Now, some of them may just have a trademark symbol, which is a little TM, instead of the registered trademark, which is the R in the circle. As long as it has either one of those, then that is your trade name. And remember, your trade names are going to vary depending on who the manufacturer of the medicine is. Next, we have our generic name. Remember, we said this is the official name of the drug. So this name is not going to change from manufacturer to manufacturer. It's going to be the same. Typically, it's going to be smaller than the trade name, and it'll be directly under the trade name. On some labels, those flip, and you see your generic first and trade second. Usually, though, your trade will be first, and your generic will be second. Other parts are dosage strength. So this is amount or weight of the medication that's supplied. So that's milligrams per capsule, milligrams per tablet, how many milliliters, so on and so forth. So form, how the drug is supplied. Is it a capsule? Is it a liquid? Is it an ointment? Is it a tablet? Is this a suppository? There's tons of different forms that medicines can take, but your label will tell you what that form is. Route, oftentimes it'll indicate how the drug is supposed to be given. Example, it may say IM only, IV only, IV-IM use. So a lot of times you can find your route from that. And then it also tells amount. So that's the total amount or volume of the medication that is in that container. So like on our Zofran back here, 50 milliliters. So this entire bottle, because it's an oral suspension, so we know that's a liquid oral medicine, we're going to have a total of 50 milliliters in there. All right, so looking at some examples here. Zoom in a little bit more. So we're looking at this drug label, and we're going to ask ourselves, okay, what's my trade name? Looking, well, there's an R in a circle here. So Keflex is going to be my trade name. All right, well, we know that it has to have a generic name, and we see this cephalexin right here. Well, that's smaller than the Keflex. Doesn't have a registered trademark, so that has to be my generic. And now our dosage strength, we're looking 250 milligrams. That's our dosage strength. Okay. Now, our form, what form does this come in? Capsules right here. And lastly, our amount. 100. So there we go. We broke down that label pretty easily. Looking at our next example. First thing I'm looking for, what's my trade name? Well, I see row 7. There's our registered trademark, so we know that's our trade name. Now remember, we said the next name that we see is going to be our generic, so ceftriaxone sodium. That's our generic. Next thing we see here, 500 milligrams. That's our dosage strength. Okay. Now this one is a good example of our showing what our route is, intramuscular or intravenous use. So this right here is going to show us our route. Okay. Now as far as our amount, this one does not actually tell us what our amount is. So that's not saying how much is in these vials. And this is just because this label is actually for the box of vials that it comes in. So looking at our next one, first thing we're going to look for is try to figure out our trade name. I'm looking, I see this fentanyl. Doesn't have an R behind it though. I'm looking all over this label. There's no trade name on this, which is fine. Some medicines aren't going to have a trade name. So which means this fentanyl, there's no R. There's no registered trademark symbol. So this is our generic, which is perfectly fine. Your labels can just have a generic name on them. Okay, so now we're looking for our, looking at our label here, we have two things that we see here. 100 micrograms per 2 milliliters or 50 micrograms per milliliter. These are your dosage strengths. Which is fine. You can have two. This is just telling you what your total is for the whole vial. This is telling you what it is per milliliter. Either answer would be acceptable unless the questions specifically ask you what is the per milliliter dosage strength, or if it's asking you what's the dosage strength of the whole vial. So just make sure that you're paying attention. So next thing we're looking for, we see this little tiny 2 milliliters here. That's our amount. So that's saying in this whole vial, we are getting 2 milliliters of a medication. And last thing we see here, injection solution for IV-IM use. That's our route. So we can give this IV, we can give this IM, either one works. All right, so last example for our medication labels. We look here, we have Norco, registered trademark, 10325. This is our trade name. So then we look, we have hydrocodone bitartrate and acetaminophen tablets. So this hydrocodone bitartrate and acetaminophen, that's our generic. So this, in this case, both of these are generic. This 10325 is telling us that there is 10 milligrams of hydrocodone and 325 milligrams per tablet. So this right here is our dosage strength. So if you have one that has like that, you have to put both on there. We see here our amount. We get 100 tablets. And we see here tablets, so we know that's our form. So we've answered all of our questions here. Now, looking at the second part that we did not have a chance to do in class, we have medication reconstitution. So what is reconstitution? This is where we're taking a powdered medication and we're dissolving it using a sterile diluent to create a liquid form of that medication just prior to administering this. So you're probably asking, what is a diluent? Your diluent is your sterile liquid that you inject into the vial of powdered medicine to help create it into a liquid form. Because obviously we can't give the patient a powdered medicine, so we have to make it into a liquid. Your common diluents, you have sterile water, sterile normal saline, bacteriostatic normal saline, and 5% dextrose solution. Make sure that when you're answering these, if you just write normal saline, that is going to be considered wrong. You have to specify what type of normal saline you're doing. So for this, your only options are sterile or bacteriostatic normal saline. Just normal saline is not an option. So the real question is, why do we reconstitute these drugs? We reconstitute these drugs because they are unstable as a liquid form for a long period of time. So we can't store them as a liquid form. So we have to store them as a powder and turn it into a liquid just before we administer it. A good example of a lot of these medications are your IV antibiotics. For most of them, you're going to go ahead and reconstitute them just before you give it to the patient because they don't have a very long shelf life if we stored them as a liquid. All right, so looking at how we're going to figure out to reconstitute these medications. Your labels for these that have to be reconstituted are going to tell you. All right, so looking here. Ceftriaxone for injection. This is an antibiotic. If we look where we find our directions on our medication labels, we see here for IV administration, for IM administration, and IV administration. We're going to look at the IM administration for this. If you look where it says IV, it tells you to read your package insert. So just read your label. If it does tell you IM and IV administration, read your question and see what it's asking you for. So let's say our question is going to ask us how we're going to reconstitute ceftriaxone to be administered IM. So to figure these questions out, all you have to do is read your label. So your first question is going to ask you, what diluent are you going to use? So we read our label, reconstitute with 2.1 milliliters of 1% lidocaine or sterile water. So first answer, 1% lidocaine or sterile water. Our next question, how much diluent are we going to use? Right here it tells us 2.1 milliliters. Okay, and then our next question may ask us, what is our new concentration of this medication once we turn it into a liquid? So remember, if it's a liquid, it's going to have a volume, meaning you're going to have something per milliliter in how we write it. So let's just read what our label says. Now it says each 1 milliliter of solution contains approximately 350 milligrams of ceftriaxone. So this is now our new concentration. 350 milligrams per 1 milliliter. You have to write your concentrations like this. A lot of people just want to write 350 milligrams. However, that's wrong. You now have a liquid, which is a volume, so you have to have this volume piece at the back of it. So there we go. We've now answered a question on how we're going to reconstitute a medicine. All right, let's look at our next example here. Looking at Ancef, again, it's another antibiotic. Our problem's going to ask us questions about reconstituting this for IM administration. So first question, what diluent are we going to use? Well, we see right here for IM administration, add 2.5 milliliters of sterile water. there's our diluent. Our next question is going to ask us how much are we going to use of that diluent. 2.5 milliliters. And then it's going to ask us what is our new concentration. It tells us shake well, withdraw entire contents, provide an approximate volume of 3 milliliters. And then you see here it says 330 milligrams per milliliter. So right there, 330 milligrams per milliliter is our new concentration. So that's pretty much wraps up Med Reconstitution. Biggest thing is to remember, read your labels. Your label's going to tell you every answer that you need to give. So just remember, make sure you watch this video a few times. Send me a message if you have any questions. Remember, this will be on your test. So make sure that you have a very good understanding of how to read your medication labels and how to complete your reconstitution questions.